All right, so I'm calling to order the Town of Kansas Personnel Board meeting for March 25th, 2025. And present we have John Flynn, Casey, got Casey, we got Rita Martin, Amy Wearspan, Brian Snyder, Chief Hawk, and June and myself. Are there any public comments on the agenda? Everybody present, so we'll move on. Approval of previous meeting minutes for January 28th, 2025. All in favor, say aye.
We have to move to approve.
Yeah, okay, motion to move.
I move to approve.
Second,
I'll second. Brian?
all in favor?
Aye.
Yes.
Move on to town updates. John, you going to town page? It's the portion where we want to talk about the goals, or what town updates are. Generally, we just talk about something. I don't know if there's anything of interest to the personal. Okay, we'll move on to old business. Lieutenant appointments. There's two officers, no two lieutenants, Officer Egley and Officer Chevrenchuk. And then for the sergeant's list, we closed out the sergeant's list and we activated that list. And we'll open up the new list here shortly. Anything you want to add to that, Chief?
Sergeant Egley was promoted in the fall. Sergeant Chevrenchuk was promoted last month's council meeting. And both lieutenants now. Hopefully, with working with you folks in town council and the manager, we will this spring. I'm hoping we will get a sergeant's promotional process off the ground, as hopefully also as well as a hiring process too.
Was Chevrenchuk the next on the list of?
He was there.
Yeah.
It was a 2-horse race for 2 spots.
Oh, right, that's right. Okay.
But Eric went over to Texas. Chevy went over.
So we're dividing up duties as we see fit, and as Mr. Casey just indicated, Lieutenant Egley, since it's in his ballpark, so to speak, will oversee investigations as well as a myriad of other top. He's out there in uniform and such. It's a new kind of division of duties between the 2 lieutenants. But Egley will still oversee investigations. Chevrenchuk will primarily focus on patrol.
Have we had any departures to the force?
Knock on wood, not in the last several.
Yeah, Lieutenant Basil retired.
Oh, yeah.
Chevrenchuk was promoted.
I skipped over Lieutenant Basil.
Yeah, probably feels like forever ago to you.
It does. Yeah, perfectly correct.
End of February. Nobody else is anticipated to retire in the near term.
And how many do we have from that list? Do you have?
The eligibility list.
Yeah. Three. Okay.
Can you remind us the names again?
You had Wyatt Hathaway, Nick Bartashevitz, Grant Kronsky. Were the 3 hires off of that list. Couple vacancies, in my opinion, that I'm hoping will fill this year. But like I said, I'll work with you
Yeah, we
guys.
have 2 spots that will be open. So once we create a new list, we'll be able to process issues too.
Are these add-ons or are they replacing?
One replacing Basil's spot,
Yeah.
one replacing the retirement of
Mark King, I believe.
who left us in November. So we've been 1 person short, we're now about 2 people short. So once we get this process rolling, after we talk about the rules and the changes, solidified.
So essentially, Chevrenchuk replaced Basil. Now we're replacing Chevrenchuk's open position with a new.
Then there'll be a
Patrol.
sergeant to fill that spot, and then we'll have to put a patrolman to fill the sergeant spot.
Oh, so 2 open positions, 1 sergeant, 1 patrol.
No, they'll both be patrolmen. But
Oh.
remember, we'll have to take a current patrolman of the sergeant.
Okay.
Pending the pass the test, then there'll be 2 patrolmen. Any questions? All right, new business. Eventually advertise the new positions.
Well, we need to discuss the changes to the rules and regulations before we would advertise. We advertise the current rules and we would have to talk about amendments to the personnel board rules and regulations. Also, another section of that ordinance that is actually linked into the rules and regulations. None of us realized was in there. Interestingly enough, the ordinance draft that we had needed to change back in January calls out two specific sections of the rules that the chief and I recommended that we consider changing. So as we do this process with hand in hand, it'll have to be voted on by council regardless. And if you pass the new rules and regulations, council has to approve them also. And at the same time, we will make this part of the ordinance in one action. That would happen tentatively, tonight. It would happen April 28th. Then we make our list, put it out on May 1st, and start the hiring process.
Well, can I have a motion to go ahead and review personnel board rules and regulations?
Don't need to do that.
No. Don't need to do
Oh, we don't have to.
Yeah.
I'll motion to review.
it. Second,
Okay.
all in favor?
Mhm.
Opposed? All right, so we'll go ahead and review it.
Sure. So the changes that were made and suggested, this was a collaborative effort between the chief and I. We did have a meeting when we talked with Mr. Shipley also about this. Ahead of time. The change we made will be consistent with the interview process change. There was also a few scoring change recommendations. I'll call it ease of language. We tried to make it a little bit more clear to read and understand. If everybody has the red line document from us, I'd be happy to go through either through each section or if you have specific questions. Okay, let's start on page number 3.
Can we put a coin?
Mhm.
Yes.
Page 3, personnel board. This was the section that talked about how board members should be appointed to fill vacancies. In order to make this consistent with policies for all boards, commissions, and authorities in the town, struck that language and indicated resolution 2025-2 as a policy. Consistent policy that was adopted to fill.
And how does that policy work? I looked on the website, it wasn't there.
Did I email about somebody emailed me about this?
It's in
I
the
did.
packet. It's in the packet.
Oh.
Sorry, it was
These
a
are
little
the
bit-
changes
Okay.
right here.
It was a little bit late that came out, so if you read the second page of that, it will talk about how applications are received, how they're advertised, notification process for applicants, term limits, which are still left in there from before, as well as.
What are the
process
term limits?
2 terms.
Okay, they're not in the personnel board description here. They are.
2 terms of 3 years each.
Mhm.
Um,
And that had been in their prior policy procedure. We did not choose to address that at this time. I think it is something that we probably should consider as council as a whole. Maybe next time we take a look at this. It's just hard to find the volunteers, and sometimes if you have a spot and they're doing a really good job, it's hard. It's going to be hard for me to tell them. Roughly at the time. So we can talk about that at some point.
And you have the alternates of 5 years.
yeah, I
Are they-
noticed
do
that
they
too.
have-
I noticed that as well.
Yeah, and are they also? Yeah, I didn't notice the term.
Same 2 terms.
Same 2 terms, so they get 10.
And I'm not familiar with I wasn't familiar with the fact that the alternate board membership 5 years are not the same as you.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
in
that's-
section 2(1)B.
Mhm.
I think we should actually make it 3 years. I don't know why it wouldn't be consistent.
With the alternates here.
Unless there's other boards that have term limits of 5 years or longer for alternates. For alternates specifically.
Well, you know, the difference in American alternates don't do too much and they kind of add consistency, so. I'm not opposed to changing it. I understand the value.
I'll be candid. Now that it's a fire person, committee,
That's a very good point.
Are there committees on the board?
The only
Yeah, I
one-
always thought that was funny.
Yeah, the only one that does is the zoning hearing board, and it's because they're
Well,
only
they're-
panel 3.
Mhm.
So.
Right, and they are
need to have
quasi-
two alternates and they're kind of-
And we used to have three, that's why we had that.
Maybe we should just strike the alternates.
Yeah, we do. We're going to need alternates. Save us going to need.
Yeah,
So, what's your recommendation? Trying to build a good alternates.
I would also recommend, yes, to answer your question.
Mhm.
I'm speaking for myself, but I would also recommend we remove the sentence in 2(1)A that starts at all primary board members or alternate board members, blah, blah, blah. Because anyone who was appointed prior is gone, so we can just strike that whole second part of that
Mayor
paragraph.
one that says appointed prior to January 1st.
Yes,
Strike the second, we could strike the next sentence also. We won't do the second. Extend the term of any primary alternate.
Yep.
Prior to-
Yep. so that section will end at 3 years, period.
Mhm. And that's confusing to town council to serve for the term of 2 and 3 years. But that's the old one, right? Because we were alternating.
We didn't want them to
Years, yeah,
start
we
at
were-
once.
right. So
Expire.
maybe you wanted to make it easier. It's easier for administration to have say, yeah.
Now that you rotate, we'll just rotate 3.
I think that's what we already have, like we're already,
Yeah, now that you've moved past 2022.
yeah,
Yeah, so we could take 2 out. and-
Okay, good choice.
Are there current, sorry, are there any, are there currently any alternates or are they both,
there are.
so they would just be scratched now
I
or
think
at the end
when-
of their thing?
I think when their term expires, we should,
Well, right now, we have a vacancy in the alternate position, and we have a vacancy in the full board position. So we candidates, and I think that if you would be ready to recommend folks at the next council meeting to fill those vacancies. One is for an alternate, one is for a full term, so we just wouldn't fill the alternate. Which honestly had been discussed by councils in this process too, so we kind of figured this year we'll just leave it as it is. So we just wouldn't appoint that other alternate. And let the term of the current alternate expire when it expires.
Did our current alternate? So they just want to see.
who is our current alternate? Do you know who is
Cynthia.
it? Okay, so Brad's term expired already.
Drive along.
Brad,
Drive along with.
oh, he's-
Yeah.
I thought so, because his name is.
And when does Cynthia's term expire?
I'd have to look at it.
I would say we just let that term go until it expires and then,
But there's a lot of language in here about how we use alternates. So you have to think about that. when you have these.
that's true. That should be like a search for alternates.
Yeah, easy.
Mhm. Mhm. Who is working on this document? Is that you, Matt? Yeah, okay.
They were just trying to.
We deal with it.
Thanks, I appreciate it. Okay, we'll move on to page 4, then organization board. I tried to make this easier for you, rather than having 2 meetings in the first month of January. I know council has to reorganize by a certain date. I don't think there's a law that requires the personnel board to reorganize by a certain date, so you can reorganize at your first regular meeting, rather than have a meeting within 10 days of the first of the year.
Question in that same paragraph, 2.3A. Meetings may also be called by the chairperson or by a majority of the other 4 primary board members. Oh, because there's 4 besides the chairperson. I get
Yeah.
it. So it's not a quorum. Okay, never mind.
Which would be page 6. Recommendations. The way this had been done in practicality was the police office receives the applications, they stamp them with the date and time, and they also, I'm hoping to take photo ID whenever you receive those applications.
Yes.
So we wrote town manager or designee, but that would essentially be the police department functioning as it always has been. That's a your job, right? That's an important job.
Yeah.
Formatting on page 7 was the only thing that we did there.
Sorry, can I go back to 2.7? I can't remember last time I read this, but in the middle of that paragraph, something that stood out to me was services of a solicitor for the board to be appointed by the board and paid by the town council. Are we supposed to formally appoint Falco? Because we've not done that during my
Well, we
tenure.
are going to
You
have,
normally do that when you have an organization.
I don't think we've done that in the past.
I don't think you have.
but didn't we talk about Mach having a solicitor?
So,
And
yeah,
we decided we needed to.
I think we're in a public meeting now, we should talk about that in
I'm
executive
sorry.
session. But yes, we need to discuss how we want to move forward. with this solicitor. So, it is the responsibility of town council to pay for the solicitor. It's up to the board to choose who that solicitor is. It's also up to the board how they use that solicitor.
Most likely recommend.
Yeah, but then maybe.
Page 6, eligibility for examination, so we just talked about that, formatting on page 7. Page 8, just clears up the board and town language, or the town council desires to list of candidates, the town shall advertise, the town shall discuss the post.
Page 8, section 3.5, second paragraph. In the case of physical and psychological examinations, the town manager or town secretary shall notify the police officer candidate. I think we should strike the portion, who has been conditionally offered a position in the police department. I don't think that we conditionally offer before we do the psychological and physical exams. In fact, now we're suggesting that the physical exam be first. So that's inconsistent with a sequence.
Don't be confused between the physical agility test and the physical exam. They're two different
Oh,
things.
exam, yep.
You only want to pay for somebody to go get a psych check and to get a true physical if they're going to be off the foot. You don't want to pay for them to have that on class.
Yep.
Physical agility test will get you where you just can't do it without they can match what we actually do. It's confusing if you don't read this all the time.
Yeah,
I
no,
just
you're right.
read
That's,
all the time, so.
yeah.
This is what I do for a hobby. I take home and I read.
Mhm.
Page 12. I'm gonna put that back in where other offices or agencies designated by the town. And that will include the police station downstairs. It's a nuanced town municipal office police station, but you don't want to have.
Can we also indicate that it can be received electronically?
Don't want to take it. I don't think we want to take it electronically, chief, unless we know we're always waiving the fee and photo ID is hard to take electronically.
Right, so I think how we've proceeded in recent times is they can download it or fill it out and print it out, but then they need to physically bring it in with their photo ID, hand it in so we can verify their identity when they're handing in that application. And then if we were to charge, which it hasn't been discussed, but we will whenever we roll this out, that's when we would accept payment as well.
So you're gonna change that. You're gonna add that back in. change
Put it
forward
back
to
in. Okay, page 14, this is a discussion point that I discussed with the chief. Of the weighting of the written and the oral examination. Previously, the weight was 60% written, 40% oral. I believe that you want to change that to 40% written and 60% oral. Two reasons. Number one, that written test just isn't that hard. Number two, weighting the oral exam with a slightly heavier score allows you to really interact with the candidate, see if they're a good fit, see if they good questions for panelists. They really feel as an officer, way more than if you can calculate 20 miles per hour on a speeding ticket. You can write a sentence, which is basically. So I'm suggesting to change the weight of that. I don't think that you're running into a conflict there. And if you weighted it so heavy on oral and so little on written, people could say, well, you're just trying to pick your, you just want to pick. If you made it 80-20, that'd be a little bit extreme. I've seen 70-30s, I think 60-40s there.
I think that was a good choice.
Personally, I'm in favor of this, but it's inconsistent with the ordinance
It
currently.
is. Yeah, that's what will need change. So that's one of the two oddities, I'll call them. But I don't understand why it's only certain portions of the rules are tacked into the ordinance. I mean, there's 20 pages of rules and there's only 4 or 5 bullet points. in the ordinance. And I asked our solicitor why, and he had a couple ideas. But what he said is the best way to move forward is strike it out of the ordinance so that the rules can be amended. Change the rules. As years go on, you may want to change what that weighting is. You know, if we talk about new contracts, we talk about lateral transfers and things like that to the police department. You're going to want to modify the rules, whereas you don't want to have to always. So my suggestion would be eliminate those sections out of the ordinance. Under tonight's review, we should make sure that the rule book is what we like, and then we'll make sure the council gets a very that makes everything effective once.
Should we also, I mean, I know that we can modify the rules at will, but just to make it a little bit, the expiration date lasts a little bit longer, on page 3 where it says, the procedure to fill a vacancy, blah, 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 consistent with resolution 25. Can we just say consistent with current appointment policy for boards and commission? Do we have to name a resolution? Because that could change 6 months from now too.
Everybody
Where are you
comfortable
seeing
with
that? You said 3, 2, 1.
Sorry, third paragraph of section 21A, the last sentence.
The procedure to fill a vacancy.
It's underlined here.
Yeah.
Should just scratch it entirely.
Well, no,
Or
just
change it.
say shall be consistent with current appointment current council, current approved by council policy, or I don't know, someone can think of the appropriate wording, but
I think you're pretty clear if you say shall be consistent with the current appointment policy for boards and commissions as approved by council.
yes.
And do you want to strike alternate board members?
Yeah, I think John's gonna have to do a search and replace with
that.
alter her search and delete with alternate.
So we're gonna remove the words alternate, and I'm not gonna call you primary board members. I'm gonna call you board members.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, testing process, page 15, corrected the 40-60 weight. I eliminated the line of multiplying the sum of these scores by 2, because we don't need to do that.
Oh, shoot.
100 points. Composite scores up 100 possible points. If you take the 0.46, so if I did the math. I'm sure I multiplied by 2.
Well, and one of the things we had discussed in the past was the huge impact of the veterans' preference points on a scale of 100 versus a scale of 200. So it's something to be aware of. To consider. I mean, it's back to what it was 2 years ago, essentially.
But it does, and that is great. for the community.
I believe that act requires them to get 10
Oh,
points.
yeah.
I think that it's intended for a 100-point scale, and if you challenge them out of a 200-point scale, I think they say you really only give them 5 points. That could have been fun. So I'm
It was
assuming
a
we never ran
convoluted
into that.
way. I mean, it's a
It was interesting, yeah, I mean, I totally get it, that was an issue in my prior town with civil service rules, which are very similar to personnel board rules. That had to give the 10 points, and I think that's in the Veterans Act.
But that becomes this too, you know, for teaching position as well.
Okay, oral examination 3.13, I deleted all of that. And rewrote paragraph. Here's the main points that stay consistent. You're still going to give the highest 12 applicants oral exam. They still had to get at least 70% if they were on the written exam. Your interview will be conducted by a panel independent of the board, with members appointed by the chief, town manager, and council. And it shall consist of 3 persons and will be comprised of persons with police management experience, including current and past chiefs or ranking officers. 10 questions with 10 points. Panelists independently score. Final score of the exam is the average of the scores of each panel.
So I'm curious, do other towns do interviews with police chiefs versus personnel boards?
This is
Most
a
all of them
very
do.
rare setting.
Yes, this is really unusual. I mean, to have citizens making these decisions, and I experience that at talking to people too. It's mostly police chiefs and people who, you know, it's wonderful that.
Nothing against us, but I saw the list of questions that the chief. I never picked up those questions. They know how to ask them, they know what the right.
And they know what
answers
to
are.
look for.
Well, that's the
Exactly.
most
Or we
Yes,
can make them
that
ages,
is
they
it.
can tell you what the right keywords are in your check boxes, but
Yeah.
when you take the chief or the regional, the chief, Franklin, or the chief Westview, they just know. They know what to do.
Yeah, and I've
The
always
beauty
thought.
of this is that panel can be dynamic, so if we get an applicant, who, let's say, was a part-time in
That's
Westview,
what I was gonna ask,
then
yeah.
Chief Hawk is not gonna pick. That's what Chief is gonna have to pick somebody. It's a good system, it's a good way to know. Feel free to chime in here on your participation in other panels as an interviewer also.
I was gonna jump in and tell Amy that too, like, for what it's worth, I've sat through multiple. And my most recent one was a promotional chief's panel for Franklin Park. They used Iowa Township's chief, me, and Westview's chief. Franklin Park gave us the questions, much like this. We went through all the promotional candidates, each scored them. Chief Leach, Franklin Park aggregated our scores, and come up with overall scores for each of the promotional rankings. And we'll put that in the hands of Chief Leach and his borough council on what they do with that. But then they had a final, like you guys were doing for us, had a final ranking list. And my experience on the ones I've sat through for different communities around here, I think it works really well. What John and Rita have both kind of said, you're putting it in the hands of people that are best equipped to know the right answers and maybe to try to mine the best information, the most information they can out of each candidate and figure out, who scores the best, who's going to make the most sense in these roles. I think it works. I think it's worked in our situation too, but as John said, I've only ran into this here in town mostly, and everything else I see is more along that.
How long has this board existed? We've always
Yeah,
had it.
You have, but you know, the duties of the board changed as time went on. So relate this to the statewide borough code. Every borough has to have a civil service commission installed. You essentially are the civil service commission. The panel of residents who are appointed by council that are here to certify a list of eligible police candidates, hear grievances and investigate any matters that need to be brought before the process. In the home rule charter, it says, and any other duties assigned by council. So as time progressed, and let's go back into maybe the 90s, the council put out a police ad and 400 people instead of 20. I think that probably administration was overwhelmed. So how are we ever going to manage this process? And it turned into a panel who said, well, we'll manage this process. They probably were very helpful at that time. They could read through the applicants or so. I get narrowed down. It just isn't the way it is anymore. Now we're like what we get last time for applicants.
We were very fortunate in the area. We had we didn't end up with 27, but initially we had 27, and that was so much higher than other communities.
That's really good.
Yeah.
But you take them right over to North Park to the physical agility test and fail half of it right away. Then they come over and take the written test and might lose one or two, then you run them through the oral exam. So that's kind of the history, I think, of how it got to where it was. How it magnified over the last couple of years with changes, I'm not sure exactly, but this is much more common than I would say most places. Second class townships don't even have to follow that procedure. They can have the chief.
Is there a concern with, let's say someone from Franklin Park applies and you've already asked the Franklin Park chief, like, I know you said you didn't necessarily have to choose that chief, but what if that person didn't want their chief to know that they've applied somewhere else? Or are they required to tell, like if someone from McCandless wanted to apply to Franklin Park, are they required to say, hey, Chief Hawk, I've submitted an application? Like, I'm just worried about the
Operations
confidentiality.
is out of whack. Everybody will fly, will get down to who we know we give away interviews to, and then it points to. So they'll look through their histories and say, okay, applicant John worked in Hampton, he worked in Edgeworth, he worked in Swift. We're not going to call any of those chiefs. Applicant two, Jack worked in O'Hara Township, wherever. It's not very often that they've worked in other places, especially since most don't have part-time. Back in part-time days, it was common to move around a place or two. Well, now nobody has part-time, which is the most part. So nobody's going to move from town to town unless they we've got that Nick, he's a good guy, he's a good policy in place. Ryan wouldn't call it the township. They'll have their usual suspects, they kind of know who's normally on each panel, unless an applicant comes forward to less conflict. So the panel isn't chosen until you know who's going to qualify for more than.
Okay, so we wouldn't necessarily have to notify their chief that they've applied elsewhere.
And in fact, you wouldn't want that.
Right.
to be part of the panel.
Right.
He could be biased pro or against.
Oh, absolutely.
So,
Then we had a young man who said he didn't want his chief to know he was in line last time.
Which can make it tricky for applicants because sooner or later, their chiefs, or at least it's going to get back to them that they probably, if they make it far enough in the process, we're going to start doing a background check. And that's inevitably, in my opinion, going to lead to questioning somebody in their current agency. And that stuff will filter probably to the chief.
Yeah, so maybe they don't have to say anything up to a certain point, but when they
Right.
get to the final process, like, oh, hey.
if I get down to panel 3 contenders, they're going to have to know. So database, they would have to get it. So once they get down to the last 3, kind of the words on it.
Yeah.
So any other questions on this change?
Page 19, this is the duration of the eligibility list, changing from a period of 2 years to a period of 6 months. The fact that council can extend that 6-month list another 6 months if they so choose. That totally possible of 1 year, the list expires. Page 20. This line, it's kind of contradicted, I think, After that, the board should determine which psychological, physical, and medical tests to be administered, or who shall administer them. It says the position of another qualified medical professional, psychiatrist, psychologist should be appointed by the town. So I removed the first one. 21, I'm not ever comfortable with words like only. If you see officer may only be dismissed for cause, and it actually contradicted itself later, so we said may be dismissed for cause. And then there's another section where it says, in addition, probationary police officer will be dismissed if they do not meet requirements and expectations. As accurately noted. So that's the catch-all. '23, just removing the term after discussion with the board to change it. Documentation for the towns of those owned by the writer.
On page 22, why is the board supposed to be involved on the
Page 22.
at the bottom of the page? Whenever the board provides vacancies, but from the board shall post the board. Why is the board posting?
Because I overlooked that.
Every time you refer to the board, it is that
You're gonna change that. to that.
Change those to the town. My 6 cents about it.
Yeah, you just need to read that.
25 changes the weighting for the promotional exams to match 40%, 60%. We also talked about increasing the minimum instead of 70%, 75% being required to pursue. C plus, you should be deciding probably
For promotion.
have promotional purposes.
So the new patrolman remains at 70, the promotional exam is 75.
Yeah, holding our promotional guys to a little bit higher standard than they do, because old set of rules that I had looked at, which were only old as of a couple of years, had that new hires at 80%. Talked about that. What we were worried about is that going to narrow our candidate pool too much. You know, it's kind of a catch-22. You want a 70%er to be one of your policemen, or do you want to have the choice to let that 70%er move forward to your police? So, kind of thought that based on the current status of low applications, the police force, leave that at 70.
Yeah.
Written exams, though, in order to stay consistent, we made the promotional written exam be a minimum of 75%, ready to move on to the next round. And must be at least 75% also. Noted that the process shall be administered in the same fashion as the other one who outlined in 3.3. Since we changed the weighting to favor oral, we needed to modify 4.9 second paragraph so that if there's a tie, the highest oral score as preference. Also change duration of eligibility less than 6 months instead of 2 years for sergeants.
Why the shortened duration for the eligibility list?
I just don't love being tied to anything for that period of time. 2-year period, you can have folks who weren't eligible to take the test become eligible. Most changes that you don't know about, you could have a police contract that allows. Half the board change. I really don't like tying it to something like that.
Not to mention that we streamlined the process, so it's not as laborious as it was before, so it's pretty easy.
There can be a situation too where this may or may not happen. Let's say, you know, post for promotion. We're in a situation now where we're gonna have 12 people eligible. You have high scoring candidates, great on a written test. You take them over there, you're like, I'm training on the chief says, I just really don't know how great this guy is. Let's say they all score 76s. Okay? They're all just very basic. And we feel like none of these folks are right. But when it comes to time to hire out of that list, it's up to council to hire out of that list. They look at the names, they get recommendations from the chief, and they say, just don't know that any of the right fit. That list can expire in 6 months and you can try again. If you wait for 2 years, you may be in a position where you have to let it expire for 2 years.
And they don't have to take their physical again, they have to do anything, right?
No, it does say that they do have to take a physical. They don't have to take a psychological evaluation yet.
Does the board have the right to extend it?
6 months. So you can extend it up to. Which in reality, if you're, if you're gonna fill that position, you need to fill it. If you have a good person in there, fill it within 6 months.
It's not the board, it's council.
Council does that. And that's the same way it was before. You make the recommendations, council still picks one out of 3.
The council extension.
For what it's worth, if I can jump in too, and I think we might have approached the subject in previous meetings, so I may be reminding you folks, the world we're in right now, police wise, there's, everybody's hiring. So a list for 2 years is pretty much going to be a dead list. And you're lucky if it lasts 2 years, because everybody has a job by then. So in theory, if we had meat on the bone, if we still have candidates out there on that list, they're going to be picked up by other agencies. It's just it's a buyer's market. And I think a 2 year, and honestly, what I had seen for my entire pretty much career here, most lists are usually good for a year. I like this where we might have burnt, and I think we did kind of burn through that list in 6 months last year. Whereas if you had it hanging around for 2 years, you're kind of.
We're in a position now where we have that.
Yeah.
Once we get this done, if you see somebody on there, and they're going to take action, because Northern Regional could be hiring, they have a starting hire salary. Something else. So we have to get candidates up. So that's why I'm very comfortable with the short. That concludes any of the proposed changes that I got in the back. Suggestions, and it's very fully with all the suggestions.
Are there any objections to the changes that have been proposed?
I'm sorry, I have just one more kind of big picture question. So remaining for the personnel board duties are hearings, investigations, and
The list, the scores will come to the tests. And we'll have a meeting with, what we'll discuss and ask the questions. What we look at the applications at that time. It is mostly procedural to weight the scores and put the order, but that's important. It shows that more eyes are on this than just administration. Like, did you administer this right? Did you score this right? That's the goal. So it still is very important. It's just not the process. You still have to subpoena time. Yeah. Really, the hardest thing that I hope we won't ever have to deal with is if somebody is agreed by the process and then they have to come to you and state the case. That's what you have that.
Welcome to the hearing. Yes, I've never.
Well, I hope we never do.
yeah, it wasn't fun.
Yeah, let's skip that question. I don't think that's relevant to what we're trying to achieve here. So are there any other objections to any of the changes, like the ones that came in and the ones that were made? Have a motion to move to accept the changes as is.
Excuse me, this is Falco. Excuse me.
All right, Falco.
I just have a couple comments before you take action. I think I had sent emails to John about, since it wasn't on the agenda, to have to make a motion to add it to the agenda, which I think it qualifies for something that can be added to the agenda to vote on it. The other question that I have, though, goes to that issue that I think Amy raised earlier about the weighting of the oral and written exams and how the new changes to the regs contradict what's in the ordinance right now. And I guess my question to John possibly is there anything in the works to make that change at the ordinance level?
It is, yes. That will take place at that will take place at the April 28th council.
Okay, because,
We had a motion to review this before you joined the meeting.
Maybe make a motion to vote on
It
it.
should
I
have
think
been
is
a
what he's
motion,
saying.
so because I was able to chime in, unfortunately, on the agenda. Technically, before you can take any action, this is a new law within the last couple of years. You have to make, somebody has to make a motion to add this vote to the agenda, and then we can vote on it.
So you're adding the review. We got that.
Yeah.
So you can, I can make a motion right now.
Go
Yes.
ahead.
I make a motion that we vote on this right now.
You have to add it to the
That was a
agenda.
motion. so-
but, excuse me, can I just clarify one more thing before you do this? Since the council is not going to be prepared, or it's not going to be possible to amend the weighting until April, should then these regulate, especially as it relates to the weighting of the oral and written exams, be consistent with that so that it matches the effective date basically becomes in April or at the April council meeting when that vote is taken?
Can it be conditional, Falco? So we would say we conditionally approve this based on council approving the ordinance.
We're in a chicken and an egg kind of here, because if council changes the ordinance first and it doesn't match the rules, then that's inconsistent also. So I would say that you can approve your rules here for the reason that even after you approve the rules, town council still has to approve the rules also. So. you
Yes, they
have to
do.
act it first before they can take action. So I'm very comfortable, it's my opinion, I'm no lawyer, but I play on TV, that you can take an action on this tonight and it's not gonna interfere with this. We can't make a list until this is changed and the council votes on it anyway. So,
And I guess the real practical impact of it is there's no testing that's going to be taking place between now and April, correct?
yes,
So if there's no testing that's going to take place, then the impact of the weighting change, won't be relevant until after the April council meeting.
that's correct.
All right, then I think, Amy, to the point that you had just mentioned about it being conditional on council, then taking action on the ordinance, I think that would probably be the best way to approach it to address the chicken and the egg issue, because we want everything to be consistent with both the ordinance and the rules.
And do we need a motion to add it to the agenda first?
Yes, that definitely has, yes.
So make a motion that we add this vote to the agenda.
And second that motion. Brian's second motion. All in favor?
I
Opposed? All right, motion passes.
make a motion to conditional.
I make a motion that we approve the rules to be conditionally approved until town council approves the ordinance that matches in April or whenever they do so.
Second motion.
We'll clean that for you.
Any, second for the motion.
I second that. motion.
All in favor?
I
All right. Opposed? All right, that motion passes. So all in favor of these changes?
Yeah, we got to.
Yes, thank you very much for your audience. I think it's very much.
Are there any public comments? Do you have anybody online?
No, sir.
Okay. For public comments, and I make, have a motion to adjourn,
So moved.
and then go to executive session. The second, right, second, all in favor? Opposed? All right, motion passes. You, please stop the, all right, Jan.